House of X #4 by Jonathan Hickman, Pepe Larraz. Where's it going? This is not a happy issue. Let's get into it. Hey there, this is Perch. It's House of X #4. Spoilers, obviously, we're going to be talking about this issue, talking a little bit about what Hickman is doing in general. This issue is out for blood. You know, it's funny. If you listen to my last review of last issue, I talked about, well, the ship blew up. The X-Men obviously escaped. We'll see how they pull it out. It's all going to be fine. And you realize in this issue very quickly, Hickman is not playing around, and this is the X-Men we remember when things are dangerous. But it does just go to show that a good decade of kind of wandery storytelling and then cheap storytelling, where death is just kind of casually tossed out with no meaning. It's interesting how you especially compare this to the last run, where death just happened off panel. It's like, oh, Havoc's dead. Havoc was more or less on panel, but a lot of these deaths were just kind of randomly tossed out there with no weight or no significance. And in this series, it's much different. So let's get into it. We get right away a look what they've done, which is a powerful page, and it feels like this is going to be kind of the hallmark for the X-Men going forward. I think this page is a bigger page than people realize. It goes through the list of humans who committed major mutant crimes: Genosha, the Decimation, mutant erasure by the Pretender Wanda Maximoff. Some pretty aggressive kind of mutant extinction event listing here. But this is picking up where it went off, where Professor X and Magneto are joining up with Storm and the Cuckoos. I'm never quite sure how they want that pronounced, but the Beast is here and Trinary, and we're going to basically do a kind of a merge and see what's going on in this suicide mission out at the sun. And right away, we're able to connect up with Jean in the water, which is a lot of just there's little things that Hickman does kind of in the background that's incredibly cool of how these mutants are using their powers, working together, kind of putting things in place. And you get a, oh, should we fear the worst? Because from the last issue when the ship blew up, they were still on it. So right away, Archangel Husker dead. A Nightcrawler is dying. Wolverine is blown up and trying to heal himself. We've got a desperate need to complete the mission. We've got to complete the mission. So teleport on board the station. Jean's remaining behind to try and figure out how to coordinate, and they're going to storm the system. And again, right here, even though off panel, Archangel Husk dead, the weight, sacrifice, and like this is playing for keeps kind of feel. And it's funny because it's clear to me, at least in reading this through, once again, we're not dealing with a current timeline. We're dealing with some other timeline. We're still one timeline back from Moira's journey. And if you haven't been following along, that statement probably is very confusing, but I do not believe we're dealing with the current reality of what's happening, unless there's a big twist that could still come, which I'll talk about at the end as kind of a prediction. But I don't believe it is. I think we're dealing with the one timeline back from what we're going to get from the X-Men universe. So suicide mission, again, people die off panel, but it feels weighty. It feels powerful. That's the key here. So X-Men, board the station. They're going to go storm it. Karina is there, and she's like, get up, we've got to keep going. We've got loss on the human side as well. We have this hatred that's boiled up inside Dr. Gregor, who's clearly, in my mind, being set up as a more major foe. We'll see. I mean, if this is a previous timeline, it's possible all this just gets erased, but this feels like kind of the next Bolivia Trask kind of character, and they're definitely putting some work into the motivations in the background here. So we discover the mutants are starting to be successful. The X-Men have detached 2 of the collars. The plan is to get the Master Mold head into the sun where it can be destroyed. And Nightcrawler and Wolverine has completed their mission. We're waiting on Mystique and Cyclops. Meanwhile, the ship's being boarded. It's quickly going to turn into a suicide mission for Monet. It's wonderful. Again, the characterization is pitch perfect with all these X-Men. I mean, it is exactly how they should sound, how it's meant to be. This is correct, you could say. You know, it's interesting. There's panels here where you see the fingerprint kind of motif used on some of the backgrounds. Just an interesting shading technique. I love it. There's a lot of things about kind of how the page is constructed. I don't know if that was more Laraz or Hickman's doing, but there's a lot of very unique visual elements in these stories. So, and it's nice to see pennants again here from the early Gen X series, and just it's just again a lot of good history. Cyclops shows up. He's successful. Now there's one left. It's Mystique, and she is captured, thrown out into space, killed. We basically are told that Monet has also been killed on the ship. Jean is kind of stranded out in space in a kind of lifeboat, and it's now down to kind of the end. We failed. Master Mold is about to come online in 20 seconds. What do we do? Professor X gives the instruction, do whatever it takes. In this case, whatever it takes means that Wolverine and Nightcrawler are going to teleport out into the sun and cut off the last piece of the Master Mold. But it's definitely death for both. So they're going to do it, and Nightcrawler, who's dying anyway, has a nice kind of poignant moment with Nightcrawler. Again, fits his past personality about kind of his soul, his religious beliefs, and it fits Wolverine as well. They're going out. This is a death scene, and they teleport out. Nightcrawler is immediately vaporized. Wolverine is kind of with his last remaining strength, is hacking away at Master Mold, who's now come online, starts to defend itself. It's clearly insane. The warning was that if it was going to come on early, it would come on crazy. And so Wolverine succeeds, manages to hack through the last of it, dives into the sun with the head, destroying it. It's done. Um, you know, Cyclops now is kind of the last X-Man left with Jean. He's running to try and get to her somehow. They don't know, even though they're going to be in a drifting escape pod with no hope of really how they get back. No food, no water. But Cyclops is determined. He's still going to get home. He tries to. Unfortunately, Karima shoots him and cuts off his powers, and he is shot and killed. So again, you see, my husband's dead, you son of a bitch. I'm not taking prisoners today. Everything in this comic is, you understand the X-Men motivations, you understand the humans' motivations. It is a big deal on both ends. And Cyclops dies. The Sentinels arrive, and unfortunately, they capture Jean. The Sentinels from Mercury that were stationed there. Just there's so much going on in these pages, and it is the end. They tear open the pod, and we get the kind of scene. And this is again the powerful scene. The mission is been successful, but at a huge cost of some of the core characters. Professor X collapsed. They murdered so many of us, the world has grown used to it. This is just how things are for those people, for mutants. No more. No more. And we get a nice kind of splash image of no more with the various things of kind of Genosha, the decimation. Look what they've done. No more. And you see this steeled resolve, and that's how we end. So we're past the midway point. There is at this point 5 issues left of this series, including kind of 2 major ones. The next House of X is going to be a major one. The next Powers of X number 6 is going to be a big one. We're seeing how this all is going to wrap up, but stakes could not be higher. It is, we've seen from the trailers and the previews for the new X-Men titles coming out that Cyclops is alive, Storm's. There's a lot of these characters obviously still living, so either they're coming back to life, in which case maybe we're not seeing Professor X at all. Maybe this is actually Mr. Sinister who's cloning these characters. That's possible, but his reaction, the tears, it doesn't seem right. Unless there's some bigger puppet pulling the strings. But if that's the case, then that's going to set up a very strange X-Men future. So I have my doubts that we're getting that. It seems more likely that Professor X is this is a previous timeline, and so now it's going to be going into how do we protect the next timeline. But we set up, in the previous issue, we set up a prison, we've set up villains, we've set up a lot of different elements to this story and to this overall kind of narrative of what the X-Men are. So a lot of things to play into in the future. The fun part about Hickman's run right now is you can't tell where we're going in the sense of how it's going to connect from right now to the X-Men relaunch and what we have in the future. How's this all going to be put in place when these X-Men titles are coming out? How are they going to be coordinated? How are we going to keep the quality up and more the vision? Hickman has laid out a vision for kind of how the characters act, behave, and coexist. And one of the concerns I think that a lot of people have, that I have about this series and where it's all going, is some of the writers, like Brian Edward Hill, does an excellent job of keeping the characters' voices. When he comes onto a story, he doesn't reinvent the characters to sound like kind of just modern hipsters. They sound like themselves. The characters sound authentic, true, and different. Some of the other writers have not. We've seen some of their work in different places. We've seen some of the work even on X-Men. We've seen some writers who are part of the Age of X-Men series, and the characters sounded bizarre. They sounded like nothing like themselves. So I'm puzzled and concerned, I guess, because this is setting a very high bar for how the titles are. It definitely requires some thought. I've seen some other reviewers kind of criticize this series because it's too hard to understand. It's complicated. Oh man, too many words. I don't know what to say. Comics have words. There's a difference between kind of all splash pages and just people leaping kind of mindlessly at each other versus kind of the Bendis approach of, there are a lot of words and maybe a couple pictures sprinkled in there. I think this cuts right down the middle. It's giving you a very dense, very complete world to play with. But it moves stuff along. You can't read this issue and claim there's not enough action. There's stuff going on. It's big. The characters are dying. It's an interesting just contrast to me because a bunch of the major team members died, and many of them in a panel or two here. But the weight of the death feels just so dramatically different from the Rosenberg issue just a couple months ago, where you had major characters dying, and it felt like they were just tossed away. Maybe it's because you were being told that there was another timeline here. Could be. It's curious how all this comes together. I mean, in the new X-Men series that's launching, you have Cyclops. It could be that he's still blinded in one eye, but seems like he's whole. You see some characters like Cypher and some others that are alive and kicking in the new series. So some of the deaths are clearly getting erased that were there before, but at the same time, how does this reconcile with what we're reading now? It leaves a lot of questions, and I think good questions. It leaves you with anticipation for what's going to play out over the next 5 weeks of these last issues. So that's what comics should have. Comics should leave you with tons of anticipation. You should be really excited about what's coming next. So here we are. This is House of X number 4. Again, powerful issue, and it's on time. It's shipping every week on time, and the quality is good. The art is fine. In the last issue, I mentioned that the art looked a little scratchy, but I think it's okay. The art still looks a little scratchy from the early kind of Pepe Larraz's work, but it's still you can't complain about it. It still looks very very good quality, very high end. Coloring is top notch. Um, no complaints. Tom Mueller, I don't know what design means. I'm assuming that's part of the pages and some of the other stuff here, but good issue, worth picking up. It's worth picking up this whole series as a collection. I think that will be a pretty powerful collection and really setting the tone for what mutant titles are going to be. If you're talking about books that Disney are going to adapt for movies, man, that would be hard with all the history that goes in here, but there's some big time stuff that would be pretty powerful. So nice to see. Let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. Let me know. Thanks for listening.